everybody, and welcome back to another brand new video where we're just 24 hours away from another brand new episode of Series 12 featuring Fugitive of the Judoon. So yes, we're up to episode 5, getting towards the midpoint of the series where we've already had 4 episodes to enjoy, and this week we've got the return of the Judoon for the first time, well, properly in Doctor Who since 2007 and their debut appearance, having only had one full story in the past. So that's certainly something very exciting to look forward to. A story set in Gloucester, focusing on the Judoon coming down to try and find some sort of fugitive who they're chasing, essentially. And obviously the Doctor gets in the way of it, and it all gets a little bit complicated for a variety of reasons, I think. So yes, one of the intriguing things is that this story is set on Earth, and at least it's been set in previous episodes with the Judoon that they don't have any jurisdiction over Earth. They're not allowed to interfere with Earth, essentially, which is why in Smith and Jones we see them transport the hospital up into the moon so they can actually go and try and find this alien that they need to sort of track down, whereas they actually have sort of plunged straight to Earth to try and find them. And in reality, they're not really a villain as such. They're just sort of the space police. So they're not there just to kill people and conquer the world or whatever. They're just there to find a criminal and capture them and move on. And so I'm intrigued to see, given the sort of look of some of these shots in the trailer and things, they almost look like more of a warrior race of Judoon, or a warrior faction, I don't know, maybe a faction that's turned bad or something like that, possibly. Or they've just got a very dangerous prisoner they've got to find and they have to go to extra means to try and find them or something, I think is quite interesting as well. So could it be that actually, although the episode is focused on the Judoon, that they aren't actually necessarily the villain of the piece, or they're not necessarily the main villain? There might be something else secret hidden in there that we don't know about yet. One of the most intriguing things we found out, well, yesterday was a tweet from the official BBC Doctor Who account saying that essentially that you thought the Master reveal was big, there's going to be even bigger twists and surprises in this episode, supposedly. So that's quite major. I think firstly we've got to take that with a little pinch of salt, given that the BBC America account did that with Orphan 55 a couple of weeks ago, and it was just the speech at the end. That's all it was. That was what they were hyping up, and it's like, that was stupid. But then that was BBC America's Doctor Who account rather than the official BBC Doctor Who account, and it's also been retweeted by one of the producers, Nikki Wilson, who said that there is some pretty exciting and surprising sort of twists and shocks in this episode. So certainly it's suggesting that there's some pretty major things going on. I would suggest and think it's likely it's going to be to do with the Ark and the whole Timeless Child and Gallifrey storyline, but exactly what, it's very, very hard to know. One of the things that's been intriguing for a while to do with this episode is a character called Ruth, who is the sort of wife we saw in the trailer, who supposedly is rumoured to be the fugitive that the Judoon are chasing down in this story, and that she somehow has a connection to the Timeless Child, and however that is all going to play out ultimately. It's kind of been swelling back and forth, the rumours, for a while that she may have something to do with it. I'm not quite sure how. I really don't know how. It's really quite confusing, but I think there's going to be some sort of more significant stuff in this story than it just being a standard sort of alien invasion story, or whatever type of story you want to see. I think it's going to be fairly heavily involved with the arc of the story and not just on one self-contained story like we've had with the last 2. And I think also the fact that Chris Chibnall is co-writing this story kind of lends credence to that, because usually it tended to be back in the Moffat era, for example, when episodes were co-written by Moffat. It was often because there was a scene or two that connected to the overall arc of the series that he'd clearly completely written for that episode, and so it seems fairly likely that that's going to be more involved with it. But this episode, of course, predominantly at least, is written by Vinay Patel, who wrote Demons of the Punjab in Series 11, which was probably one of my favourite stories, actually, of Series 11. I felt a really well-written historical story that really had sort of, was done in a really emotive way and just really effectively pulled off. One of the, certainly, apart from the villain, who wasn't very good, or what was a shame they weren't an actual villain in Demons of the Punjab, but apart from that, I thought it was quite a strong story. So I'm looking forward to seeing his second attempt at Doctor Who, although it is a sort of present-day story rather than a story from the past this time, but I still feel optimistic that he's going to be able to pull it off fairly well, and I hope that with some arc stuff thrown in there as well, it could create a really quite fantastic story. As is kind of the norm now, they're pretty much keeping under wraps anything significant about this story to tell us. There's no previews from the press or anything like that doing the rounds like we've had in previous series. That's again gone for this episode, so it means it's a lot more difficult to kind of come up with any sort of ideas and opinions on whether it might be good or not, really, because we just don't know. No one's been able to tell us anything. So that's just something we have to wait for. It means it's a little bit harder to kind of give as much of an in-depth preview as maybe I've been able to in the past. But yes, ultimately I'm just very, very intrigued to see what the Judoon have to do with everything in this story, why they're acting the way they are, why they're on Earth, and what the arc sort of effects of this is going to be with this supposedly very big shock or twist or something that's even bigger than the Master reveal, which was pretty major. So it's got to be something pretty substantial to be as big as they hyped it, but then it could also just be sort of social media hype trying to get people excited when actually it's not that big. But we'll see. So yes, that's just my quick little preview of episode 5, Fugitive of the Judoon. I'm sorry that I can't really give you any more information. That just simply isn't really much more doing the rounds at the moment. But I'd love to hear your theories on what you expect might happen in this episode or anything arc related in the comments below. But apart from that, as always, hit that like button, that subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for another one. Goodbye.